Have you ever looked around at everyone else and thought, how are they moving forward while I'm still standing here? Not because you're lazy, not because you don't care, but because every day feels exactly the same. You wake up, you tell yourself that today will be different, and then somehow it isn't. Days become weeks, weeks become months, months become years, until one day you realized you've spent more time thinking about the life you wanted than actually living it. I know that feeling because I lived it, and one ordinary Tuesday completely changed the way I see my life.
For years, I thought motivation was the answer. I watched videos, read books, saved hundreds of inspirational quotes that I never looked at again. Every Monday became a fresh start. Every new year was going to be my year. Every failure came with another promise. Next time, I'll do better. But next time always looked suspiciously like the last time. The strange thing wasn't that I lacked information. I knew exactly what I should be doing. Exercise, sleep earlier, stop wasting hours scrolling, start the business, learn the skill, take the risk, call the person. I knew all of it. Yet, every evening, I climbed into bed with the same quiet disappointment. Not dramatic, not devastating, just heavy. The kind of feeling you don't talk about because nothing terrible happened. You simply watched another day disappear. And after enough days disappear, you begin wondering if your life is disappearing with them.
3 years ago, I was sitting in my car outside a grocery store. I wasn't shopping. I wasn't waiting for anyone. I was just sitting there. The engine was off. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. People walked past carrying bags, laughing, talking on their phones, living ordinary lives. And for some reason, I couldn't make myself get out of the car. Have you ever had one of those moments where your body feels heavy for no obvious reason? Nothing catastrophic had happened, no huge tragedy, no dramatic breakup, no financial disaster. Just months of small disappointments stacked on top of each other. Missed opportunities, plans that never started, ideas that stayed in notebooks, goals that quietly expired. I realized something uncomfortable. My biggest problem wasn't failure. It was hesitation. Every decision became a debate. Every opportunity required perfect timing. Every dream needed one more week of preparation. I kept waiting until I felt ready. The problem, ready never came.
As I sat there, staring through the rain, an elderly man parked beside me. He climbed out slowly. His movements were careful, measured. He looked to be in his 70s. Before walking toward the store, he paused, looked up at the gray sky, smiled. Actually smiled. Not because anything exciting was happening, not because life suddenly became perfect. He simply looked grateful. I remember thinking, how? How could someone walking into a grocery store on a rainy Tuesday seem happier than I was? I couldn't stop watching him. When he came back 20 minutes later, he noticed me sitting in my car. He gave me a small wave. I waved back. Then, to my surprise, he walked over. He knocked gently on my window. I rolled it down. He smiled again. You okay?
He leaned lightly against his shopping cart. "You remind me of myself," he said. "When I was younger, I thought life started after the next promotion, then after buying a house, then after having enough money, then after retirement." He chuckled softly. "I spent 40 years waiting for my real life to begin." I didn't know what to say. He wasn't giving a motivational speech. He wasn't trying to sound wise. He simply sounded honest. "The funny thing," he continued, "is that while I was waiting for life, life was happening." That sentence stayed with me long after he drove away. Life wasn't waiting somewhere in the future. Life wasn't hiding behind a bigger paycheck, a better body, a different city, or perfect confidence. It had been happening every single day, and I had been treating those days like practice rounds.
Think about that for a moment. How many conversations have you rushed through because you were focused on tomorrow? How many sunsets have you ignored because you were checking your phone? How many weekends disappeared while you promised yourself you'd finally start on Monday? We convince ourselves that one day we'll become the person we've always wanted to be. But that person isn't created in one magical moment. They're built through ordinary Tuesdays, quiet mornings, boring afternoons, small decisions that nobody applauds. Success rarely arrives with fireworks. Most of the time, it shows up wearing ordinary clothes. That conversation in the parking lot didn't transform me overnight. I didn't suddenly wake up disciplined. I didn't become fearless. I didn't magically stop procrastinating. In fact, the very next morning, I almost slipped back into the exact same routine. But then, something happened a few days later that forced me to confront a question I'd been avoiding for years. A question so simple, yet so uncomfortable that I couldn't stop thinking about it. And once I answered it honestly, everything began to change.
The next morning. The morning after my conversation with the man in the parking lot, I woke up expecting something to feel different. You've probably seen those movies where a character has a life-changing realization and suddenly everything falls into place. They leap out of bed, energized, ready to conquer the world. That wasn't me. My alarm rang. I hit snooze. Twice. I scrolled through my phone before my feet even touched the floor. I stared at a long list of things I wanted to accomplish, and somehow, within an hour, I'd already convinced myself that today wasn't the right day to start. It was almost funny. One meaningful conversation hadn't erased years of habits, and maybe that's exactly the point. Real change doesn't begin with a dramatic transformation. It begins with noticing how easily we slip back into old patterns. The question I couldn't shake. For the next few days, I kept thinking about something the older man had said. I spent 40 years waiting for my real life to begin. At first, I felt sympathy for him. Then, gradually, I realized I wasn't thinking about his story anymore. I was thinking about mine. One evening, I opened a notebook that had been sitting on my desk for months. Most of the pages were filled with goals I'd written over the years. Start exercising, read more books, launch the side project, learn a new skill, travel more, call my parents more often, spend less time online. Some of those goals had been written 3 different times in 3 different years. I wasn't failing because I lacked ambition. I was failing because I kept resetting instead of progressing. That's when I wrote a question across the top of a blank page. If nothing changes, what will my life look like 5 years from now? I sat there for several minutes. I wanted to imagine a better future. Instead, I imagined the most likely one. I'd still be telling myself I was planning, still waiting until I felt confident, still watching other people take risks while I researched them. That picture scared me more than failure ever had. The cost of waiting. We often think fear is what stops us. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of embarrassment. But there's another kind of fear that's much quieter. The fear of staying exactly where you are. The strange thing is that our minds treat familiarity as safety, even when familiar isn't making us happy. We stay in routines that drain us because they're predictable. We postpone difficult conversations because silence feels easier.
We delay big dreams because imagining them is more comfortable than risking them. Without realizing it, we trade temporary comfort for long-term regret. And regret has a way of arriving slowly, not at all at once. It shows up in small moments, when someone younger than you accomplishes something you've always wanted to do, when you rediscover an old journal filled with goals that never became reality, when you hear yourself saying, maybe next year, again. A conversation with my sister. A few days later, I visited my sister. She had no idea about the conversation in the parking lot or the thoughts that had been running through my head. We were sitting in her kitchen drinking coffee when she asked a simple question. So, how have you been? You know those questions that sound casual but somehow catch you off guard? I almost gave the automatic answer. I'm good. Instead, I paused. I don't know. She looked at me. What do you mean? I shrugged. I feel like I'm busy all the time, but I don't feel like I'm moving. She smiled, not because it was funny, but because she understood. Then she said something that surprised me. You've been saying that for years. Not in a cruel way, not as criticism, just as an observation. For a moment, the room felt completely still. I realized she wasn't talking about the past few weeks. She meant years. How many conversations had I had where I described the same frustrations, made the same promises, and imagined the same future? It was uncomfortable to hear, but sometimes the people who love us see patterns long before we do.
The difference between thinking and doing. On the drive home, I started thinking about how much time I spent preparing to start, preparing to learn, preparing to improve. I watched tutorials, read articles, made plans, compared notebooks, researched equipment I didn't need yet, organized folders, created schedules, everything except the one thing that actually mattered: beginning. Preparation can feel productive. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's just procrastination wearing a nicer outfit. The truth is, I wasn't building confidence. I was hiding behind preparation because it protected me from the possibility of failing. As long as I hadn't started, I couldn't disappoint myself, but I also couldn't surprise myself. The small experiment. Instead of trying to change my entire life overnight, I decided to run an experiment. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would look impressive online, just one promise. Every day, I would do one meaningful thing before doing something comfortable, before checking social media, before watching videos, before telling myself I'd do it later. One meaningful thing. Some days that meant writing for 15 minutes. Other days it meant taking a walk without my phone. Sometimes it was making a difficult phone call I'd been avoiding, or reading 10 pages of a book instead of scrolling endlessly. It seemed almost too small to matter. Part of me wondered if it was even worth doing. But something interesting happened. Keeping one small promise to myself felt different than making 10 big promises I never kept. For the first time in a long time, I ended the day feeling like I'd actually moved forward, not by miles, but by inches, and inches repeated often enough become distance. The shift. A week passed, then 2. Nothing about my life looked extraordinary from the outside. I wasn't suddenly successful. I wasn't waking up at 5 a.m. I wasn't posting motivational quotes or documenting a dramatic transformation. But inside, something had started to change. I trusted myself a little more. Because confidence isn't built by telling yourself you're capable, it's built by proving it to yourself one small action at a time. I began to understand that discipline isn't about being perfect. It's about reducing the gap between what you say you'll do and what you actually do. Every time those two things become a little more aligned, your relationship with yourself changes.
You stop seeing yourself as someone who's always trying, and you start becoming someone who follows through. Transition to part 3. I wish I could tell you that from that point on, everything was easy. It wasn't. A few weeks later, I faced a setback that almost pulled me back into my old habits. For a moment, I thought I'd lost all the progress I'd made, but that setback taught me the most important lesson of the entire journey. It showed me that success isn't about never falling behind. It's about learning how to begin again without believing you've failed. And once I understood that, everything started to feel different.
When life pushed back. For about 3 weeks, I stayed consistent. Not perfect, consistent. Every day, I kept that promise to myself. Do one meaningful thing before reaching for comfort. Some days it felt easy. Other days it felt like dragging myself uphill. But I was moving. Then life happened. Work became overwhelming. A family member got sick. My sleep suffered. The routines I'd been building started to slip. One missed day became 3. 3 became a week. And before long, I found myself back on the couch late at night, mindlessly scrolling through my phone, feeling that familiar disappointment creeping in. It was amazing how quickly my mind returned to its old script. See, this is who you are. You always quit. You were never really changing. Those thoughts felt convincing, not because they were true, but because I'd heard them so many times before. The mistake I used to make. In the past, this is where the story would have ended. I'd miss a few days, feel guilty, decide I'd start fresh on Monday, then the following Monday, then the first day of the next month, then New Year's Day. I was addicted to fresh starts, not because they worked, because they gave me permission to delay. But this time, something felt different. Instead of asking, "How did I fail?" I asked a different question. How do I restart? That one change made all the difference. Because successful people don't avoid setbacks, they recover from them faster. The power of starting small again. The next morning, I didn't try to make up for lost time. I didn't create a strict schedule. I didn't promise myself I'd work twice as hard. I simply returned to the smallest version of the habit. 10 minutes of focused work, a short walk, 1 page of reading, 1 healthy meal. That was it. At first, it almost felt too easy. Then I realized something important. The goal wasn't to impress myself. The goal was to rebuild momentum. Momentum is fragile, but once it starts rolling, it has a way of carrying you forward. Think of pushing a heavy car. The first few inches require the most effort. After that, movement becomes easier. Life works the same way.
The trap of comparison. Around that time, I also noticed another habit that had quietly been stealing my motivation. Comparison. Every time I opened social media, someone seemed younger, smarter, richer, stronger, or more successful. People announcing promotions, launching businesses, running marathons, buying homes, traveling the world. Meanwhile, I felt proud that I'd managed to keep a promise to myself for 1 week. It hardly seemed comparable. Until I realized I was comparing my behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel. I wasn't seeing their doubts, their failures, their sleepless nights, only the polished ending. Comparison has a strange effect. It makes other people's progress look effortless and your own progress feel invisible. But invisible progress is still progress. Roots grow long before anyone sees the tree. A lesson from my grandfather. When I was a child, my grandfather loved gardening. Every spring, he'd spend hours planting seeds in neat rows across his backyard. As a kid, I didn't understand why. For weeks, nothing happened. The soil looked exactly the same. I remember asking him once, "Did the seeds die?" He smiled and said, "Just because you can't see growth doesn't mean nothing is happening."
At the time, I thought he was talking about plants. Years later, I realized he was talking about people. We live in a world obsessed with visible results: weight lost, money earned, followers gained. But the most important changes happen where nobody is looking. The decision to keep going, the discipline to show up, the courage to try again after disappointment. Those things don't make headlines, but they change lives. The 3 questions. Every evening, I started asking myself 3 simple questions, not to judge myself, just to stay aware. First, what did I do today that moved my life forward? Sometimes the answer was big. Often it was small, but there was always something. Second, what distracted me? Not to feel guilty, to understand. Awareness is the first step towards change. Third, what's one thing I can do tomorrow? Not 10 things, 1. I've learned that our brains love clarity. When we give ourselves enormous lists, we create overwhelm. When we give ourselves one clear action, we create momentum.
What success really looks like. I used to imagine success as a finish line. One day I'd arrive, everything would finally make sense, I'd feel confident all the time, motivated every morning, happy every evening. But that's not how life works. Success isn't a destination. It's a relationship with yourself. It's waking up and knowing you can trust your own word. It's understanding that bad days don't erase good habits. It's realizing that one mistake doesn't define your identity. The strongest people I know aren't the ones who never struggle. They're the ones who refuse to let one difficult chapter become the whole story. The big realization. One afternoon, I walked past the same grocery store where I'd met the older man. Without thinking, I parked in almost the exact same spot. The weather was completely different. Bright sunshine, families loading groceries, children laughing, everything looked ordinary. But I wasn't the same person who had sat there weeks earlier. Not because my life had become perfect, because my perspective had changed. I finally understood what that man had been trying to tell me. Life wasn't waiting for me somewhere in the future. It had never been waiting. It had been unfolding every single day. The only thing that had changed was that I had finally started paying attention. Transition to part 4. Months later, I would unexpectedly run into that man one more time. He probably had no idea how much our first conversation had changed me. But what he told me during that second meeting became the lesson I carry with me every single day. A lesson that reminds me, whenever life feels uncertain, that the greatest risk isn't failing. It's reaching the end of your life and realizing you never truly gave yourself the chance to live it.
An unexpected reunion. About 6 months had passed since that rainy afternoon in the grocery store parking lot. Life looked different. Not because everything had fallen into place. I still had difficult days. There were mornings when I wanted to stay in bed, projects that didn't work out, moments of self-doubt that whispered the same old lies. The difference was that I no longer believed those lies as easily. I had learned that progress isn't measured by perfection. It's measured by your willingness to keep showing up. One Saturday morning, I stopped by the same grocery store. As I pushed my cart toward the entrance, I noticed someone standing beside the flower display. It was him, the older man. He looked exactly as I remembered, calm, patient, carrying himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had stopped trying to impress the world years ago. I walked over and introduced myself. "You probably don't remember me," I said. "We talked in the parking lot a few months ago." He smiled almost immediately. "The rainy day." I laughed. "You remember?" He replied, "I remember people. Rain just helps." Telling him the truth. We sat on a bench outside the store for nearly half an hour. I told him everything, how our conversation had stayed with me, how I'd started keeping small promises to myself,
how I'd stumbled more than once, how I'd stopped waiting for the perfect moment. When I finished, he nodded thoughtfully. Then he asked a question I wasn't expecting. "So, are you happier?" I paused. For a long moment, I didn't know how to answer. Finally, I smiled. "I think I'm more present." He smiled back. That's usually where happiness hides. The lesson he learned too late. For a while, we simply watched people come and go. Parents unloading groceries, teenagers laughing over something on a phone, an elderly couple walking slowly, hand in hand. Then he spoke again. "When I was your age, I thought life was something I had to earn. I believed I had to become successful before I deserved peace. I had to achieve more before I could enjoy today. I kept moving the finish line." He looked out across the parking lot. The funny thing about finish lines is that life keeps drawing new ones. You reach one goal, then another appears. Another promotion, another milestone, another purchase, another achievement. If happiness always depends on reaching the next finish line, you'll spend your whole life running, and you'll never notice the scenery.
The bus driver. He told me a story I'd never heard before. When I retired, he said, I started driving a school bus part-time. I looked surprised. You? He laughed. It wasn't for the money. It gave me something to do. Every morning, I'd pick up the same children. There was one little boy who waved at every single person we passed, every mail carrier, every crossing guard, every jogger, every stranger. One day I asked him why. The little boy answered, because maybe they need someone to wave at them today. The older man smiled. I've never forgotten that. Children have a remarkable way of noticing things adults overlook. Adults become obsessed with destinations. Children find joy in the journey. Maybe wisdom isn't becoming more complicated. Maybe it's remembering what we knew before the world convinced us to rush through life. What really changes a life? As our conversation came to an end, he stood up slowly and adjusted his jacket. Before walking away, he said something that I've carried with me ever since. People think one big decision changes a life. It almost never does. It's the small decisions, the ones nobody sees, the decision to go for the walk, the decision to apologize, the decision to read one chapter, the decision to put the phone down, the decision to begin. Repeat those often enough, and one day you'll look back and realize you became someone completely different. Then he smiled. I should probably buy my groceries before my ice cream melts. We both laughed. He waved and disappeared into the store. I never saw him again. What I understand now. Sometimes I wonder if he realized how much he helped me. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. But every now and then, when I catch myself rushing through another ordinary day, I remember that rainy afternoon. I remember sitting in my car, convinced my life hadn't started yet. I remember believing that happiness lived somewhere in the future. I remember thinking I needed more confidence before I could begin. Now I know something different. Confidence doesn't come first. Action does. Purpose isn't something you discover all at once. You build it. One ordinary day at a time. One ordinary decision at a time.
A message for you. If you're watching this and you've been waiting until you feel ready, waiting until you're less afraid, waiting until you have more money, more time, more certainty, ask yourself one question. What if this is the season your life is asking you to begin? Not next month, not next year,
today. Not with some massive, life-changing leap, with one small step. Send the message. Write the first page. Take the walk. Make the phone call. Start the project. Read the chapter. Apply for the job. Whatever your step is, take it. Because the person you want to become is built by the choices you make when no one is watching. The final thought. One day, years from now, you'll look back on this chapter of your life. You probably won't remember what was trending online. You won't remember every email you answered or every hour you spent scrolling. But you'll remember the moments that changed your direction. The day you decided to believe in yourself just a little more. The day you stopped waiting for permission. The day you realized that life wasn't something happening to you, it was something happening through you. And maybe, just maybe, that day can be today. Outro. If this story resonated with you, I hope you'll carry one idea with you after this video ends. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Most of the moments that change our lives don't look extraordinary while they're happening. They look like ordinary mornings, ordinary conversations, ordinary Tuesdays. Until one day you look back and realize those ordinary moments quietly became the life you were searching for all along. If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments, what's one small action you're going to take today instead of waiting for someday? Sometimes sharing that commitment is the first step toward making it real. And if this message encouraged you, consider subscribing for more stories and ideas designed to help you build a life you'll be proud to look back on. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, your future isn't created in one extraordinary moment. It's created by what you choose to do today.